Why do unhealthy churches sometimes look like they're growing? Let's talk about that right now on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Mathieu.
All right.
So, not all that glitters is gold, my friend.
True.
And not everything that grows is healthy. And anybody who's listened to this podcast for any length of time knows that we've chatted about this kind of thing indirectly, or it's kind of been woven into an episode. I think about 10 weeks ago or 10 episodes ago, we talked about some challenges of growing churches, and we sort of hinted at this in one of the points, was that, it may or may not be a healthy situation. So 10 weeks ago, we had made a note, hey, let's do an episode on this. Let's go a little bit deeper on why sometimes even unhealthy churches are growing churches and the reasons for that. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, with this conversation has come up, at least, with you and I, because we've both, we've been in places and we're like, what is leading there to be a lot of people here? We sometimes, when you have your church consultant hat on, you investigate. We're always on the investigation. And it makes you wonder. And I mean, I feel this also because again, we work with declining churches a lot, plateaued churches. And, we have empathy for a lot of the pastors and leaders who are feeling at the end of their rope, like, what do we need to do around here? And, something new goes in to their city and they're like, what is going on? Why is this place growing so much over here? Why? And, I think, sometimes they might even feel like, how come God is blessing that, is not blessing what we're doing?
Yeah.
And that's just not always the case. And so that's a little bit of, I think, the heart behind this, why unhealthy churches sometimes grow, because you may not know whether it's a healthy church or not. From outward appearances, it just looks, it's booming. It's great. And the parking lot's full. They got all this new stuff is happening. Everybody seems happy and excited. And all of that can be true, but let's peel back a little bit and look at maybe some possibilities of what might be happening that you might not be envious of, I guess, is kind of where I'm going.
Yeah.
You might be thinking, I wish we had all these people, but you may not envy what's happening inside the walls.
I think, my one caution would be, I think that sometimes smaller churches have an automatic bias against larger churches. And
yeah,
they will go, well, it's got to be one of these reasons.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I want to caution you against that if you're listening to this episode and think that we're describing all larger churches or all growing churches or the ones that are growing really fast, because that's not always true. I've had the privilege of attending and working with and consulting with growing churches that are healthy, and they're growing for the reasons you would want for a church to grow. And so I think it's important to know that there are growing churches that are smaller, and there are growing churches that are bigger. There are growing churches that are healthy. There are growing churches that are unhealthy. There are healthy churches that are smaller that haven't yet started to grow. There are healthy churches that are bigger. All of those like nuance exists. And so what we're trying to do today is not pick on any particular category of size of church as much as we're trying to pick on the reasons why you can mimic health. And those things, that is dangerous. So if anything, maybe just take a look at your own church and go, man, if we've ever seen a trend in growth, I want to make sure that it's for the right reasons and not for one of these things that's sort of a shortcut that ultimately sabotages the church in the long run.
Yeah. And I think one of the cautions that we probably would also give you is minimize the amount of time you spend comparing yourself to any other church or on what somebody else is doing, and maximize the time you spend thinking about what's right for your church, how you can help it improve, and how you can be on mission.
That's such a great point. We need to get into these points. But one thing on that I want to say, this is why when a church works with us, there are very few places where you will see us throw up a benchmark against some other standard. There are a few. One would be, these are just internal benchmarks that we have, certain benchmarks for what volunteer participation rates and groups participation rates. Those aren't based on national standards. They're just based on what we would say this is a minimum healthy standard. And then the other would be around giving, where we would say, hey, here's what the national average is for per capita giving. But because I just think it's helpful for churches to know where they're at in that spectrum. But size comparisons and going, okay, you're in this quintile or whatever, we just don't do that. We don't think it's helpful.
Yeah. The biggest comparisons we like to make are comparing your church to God's word.
Amen. Yeah, well said.
Okay. All right. So, and we could probably have come up with a much longer list. There's a lot of things, but we're just going to throw 4 things at you. The first one, it could be this charismatic, dynamic leadership. There's a lot of churches that grow really quickly because the main person up front is just really dynamic, charismatic personality, great speaker, and just everybody seems to love every word that comes out of his mouth. And this is, again, not always, you don't take that and go, that's an unhealthy thing. It's not an unhealthy thing, but it's a possibility that the growth of the church is all because of everybody wants to just hear this person speak. And there's got to be more to that. So I guess the unhealthy component that we're really referring to here is that that's it. That's all the church has to offer. Yeah. And it doesn't have anything else supporting it in all of the essentials that we would consider a healthy church to have. And then I guess as a nuance of this is that we have an attractional personality, but the substance that is being presented isn't bringing fruitful transformation to the hearers. And that worst of it, I think, is that not only are they capable of gathering a crowd, they're then not bringing a substantive message that leads to life transformation. Mm-hmm. And so that's a danger zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at the example of Jesus to see a leader whose personality and charisma is a draw and an attraction. I mean, Jesus certainly in his earthly ministry was totally capable of drawing a crowd, not just because he could heal, but also through his presence and through his speaking. And I'm certainly not trying to make anybody go, so be as good as Jesus. Like we're all going to fall short of that standard. But to point out that teaching skill as a mode of attracting a crowd isn't inherently bad. We only need to look as far as Jesus to go, no, it can be a good thing. However, Jesus also had the ability to push the crowd away by saying hard things.
Yeah.
You know, when Jesus says, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And everyone leaves except for the disciples, because this is a hard teaching that he has. Speaking of that sacrifice and that picking up your cross, these are things that people don't want to hear. So if you ever find yourself in a position where people are attracted to your teaching and to your style, and as a result of this, you find yourself wanting to couch things or not say hard things so that people will continue to like you, you need to, that should be a red flag in your own heart and go, okay, I can't steer away. I'm glad that people like my teaching ability, but I need to be sure that what I'm teaching is the word and not my word.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, we've seen examples all over Christendom of huge churches and leaders, they're writing books and making appearances and all this stuff. And then, you can see evidence that they're just preaching to what people want to hear. Easy, easy preaching, non-challenging preaching. That's easy on the ears, You're not making me do anything different. This is a place I like to be. You got good coffee and donuts, and you're telling me everything that I want to hear.
I want to hear.
Sign me up.
What's not to like? Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Our second one is more consumer-oriented programs in the church. And I mean, one of the other points that we have under here is that you're not really demanding it much of me. Couple this with point one. I come in on Sunday. I hear a really good feel-good message. Shake a few hands, have a couple of hugs, a good cup of coffee, and a donut, and you haven't said I should do anything else.
Right.
I love that. This is great, because we got T-ball starting in a half hour anyway. And then I got all kinds of stuff going this week. I'm probably going to be working late. And so, yeah, you haven't told me I have to do anything else. This is a church that people might find attractive because they might have heard, or maybe they were in a previous church that was like, hey, you need to be up here on Wednesday night. And then you got to be in a home group and you got to come to Sunday school. And it seems like they wanted me to do all kinds of stuff. This church doesn't do that at all.
Yeah.
This is great. So you can see, obviously, being facetious here, that our churches need to be challenging us to live a biblical lifestyle and be participating in the work of the ministry and to be growing as a disciple, to be studying God's word and to be fellowshipping with other believers and to be sharing our faith and to be in prayer. There's a lot of things that God, through his word, demonstrates we should be investing in. And when our church is not trying to strengthen those areas in us, for some, that will be an attractional place to be.
Totally. I mean, I think we've labeled this consumer-oriented programs, but I think we could just say worship-only churches.
Yeah, lack of programming.
And lack of it's almost like it's like simple church gone sideways, where it's like we cut the programs not for the sake of clarity, but for the sake of reducing expectations on people, and go, we just show up on Sunday. When we're putting the whole burden of discipleship on the Sunday morning experience, which we call, even calling it that, it's an experience. Come and experience this, which isn't the end of the world. I'm not trying to be too critical, but yeah, I mean it's easy church, and that's a great way to grow things. Oftentimes, you go, let's just reduce expectations on people.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess this was in last week's episode. We talked about how vision drives growth, but the number one predictor for overall health in the church is the discipleship pathway. And I've got some data now to kind of back that up. But if you've got a clear discipleship pathway, that is the leading indicator on whether or not your overall health church is healthy, including growing, not just like healthy in a, we're not growing, but we're healthy. No, growing and healthy. And so what we see in some of the data that we have with the churches is that they can have a really high Sunday attendance number, but all of the other indicators are not healthy. Low volunteer participation, low groups attendance participation, and even their vision scores can be low. Their other things can be, leadership scores are low. These other things can be low, even though the Sunday morning number is high. And it's because potentially it may be that it's a Sunday morning only church, Sunday morning experience only church. That's not good.
Yeah. My wife reminded me of this when I was talking to her about this episode. We used to pass a church in Texas driving south. So I apologize if anybody knows this church. I don't think it's still there. Maybe it's still there. But I think on their sign, they were advertising that it was like 15 minutes, like a 15-minute worship service or something.
Oh, okay.
I don't know anything about it. Maybe I've got the complete wrong idea. If you know this church and you're like, this is the most amazing church. Yeah, that was a thing but you're misunderstanding.
All kinds of thoughts in my head that I'm thinking, I'm immediately filtering them and going, don't say that. No, definitely don't say that.
We would call it like, the drive-through church. It's like you pull up to McDonald's and get your order and drive out. But I'm like, 15-minute church? What is this? Again, I apologize if this was an amazing church and I completely misunderstood, but that just didn't give healthy church vibes to me.
You can get all that discipleship, 15 minutes for your money back.
I'll have to do some searching and see if 15-minute church is around anymore. I don't know. But
That was the name of the church, or that's just what?
I'm trying to remember what led us to think that it was 15 minutes, if that was the name of the church or if it said on the sign. Maybe they had a sign that was like 15-minute worship service.
Sounds like youth group campfire vibes.
I don't have a lot of time. I need a worship service stat. We got you. That's our starter plan.
Yeah.
The plus plan is an hour and 15, but
An hour.
the starter
Yeah,
plan.
you get an extra hour. Man. All right. The third reason why an unhealthy church might be fast growing is just because of where they're located. You can have a highly populated area. Every time I go, I grew up in Dallas, but I don't live in Dallas anymore. I live in East Tennessee. But anytime I go back home for work or to visit family, I'm always like, how are there so many of these churches? I mean, it's hard to talk to DFW churches because their perceptions of church size are way skewed. They might be a church of 350 and they go, oh, we're a small church. And I'm like, you're a big church. Most places in the world, and even most places in the US, you'd be a really good sized church, but they'll go, oh man, we're tiny, you know? And so you sometimes you're in a DFW, you're in a Dallas Fort Worth area, and the churches just run big because everything's bigger. And sometimes you're in the middle of a cornfield in Nebraska, and you shouldn't have an expectation that your church could be 1,000 people, should be 1,000 people, or any of that. Although I did once work with a church in, what state were they in? Ohio, I think. And they were in the middle of nowhere, AJ. Like, nowhere. And they were an hour. I had to drive an hour and a half from South Bend, Indiana, like a whole other state, to get to them. They must have been in Indiana. Or they were also in Indiana. But I had to drive an hour and a half from South Bend. And South Bend's not big. South Bend's a middle market place to get to this place. And there were 800 people. So, I mean, you can, I guess, have larger churches in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's uncommon.
I spoke at a
But that
conference.
same church in DFW would be like, we're tiny. You know,
Yeah.
there are 800 people.
Yeah, I had somebody from like the middle of nowhere in Texas one time. I was speaking at a conference, and they were kind of pushing back. I don't remember exactly what I was talking about, but you know, it was related to growing churches, and he was pushing back. What if I'm out and, you know, I got this and it's super rural and there's nobody for miles. How can you expect my church to grow? And I'm like, okay, golly, let's push the limits of what we might be able to do. So yeah, I mean, if you're in, you know, 100 families live in the entire county and, you know, it's miles to drive, sure, your church it's going to be small. It can be totally healthy and totally small, and you have hardly any mission field within driving distance. Yes,
I have worked in these situations. I've worked with multiple churches in very rural locations and seen them in a year double their growth, but that was going from 30 people to 60 people.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic, by the way, considering their towns only had 250 people in them.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, we've ended up flipping the script here to the other side of this. I mean, to very small churches, but you know, yes, there are some huge population booms happening in cities.
Well, I mean, it's not irrelevant. I guess what we're saying, the point is, your geography does have some influence over the size, either maybe making it artificially small or making it artificially large, depending on some of these other factors.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to be big just because you're in a highly populated area.
New neighborhood goes in and a church goes in over there, and all of a sudden there's restaurants and fast food and there's a ton of people.
Do you remember this? I'm not calling them an unhealthy church, just as a preface. Please hear this. Please. But I remember growing up when Stonebriar Community Church opened up. You know that church in Frisco?
They're by the Stonebriar Mall.
Right there by the mall. Yep. And I think that the church maybe opened before the mall did. And I remember just thinking, what is this? I mean, they built a big church. And I thought, what are they doing? This is crazy. Because there was nothing in Frisco. People who are listening to the podcast who don't know Frisco, Texas. It's where the Dallas Cowboys headquarters are now, just for context. But at the time, I thought, this is nuts. And now it's this massive mega church. I'm not calling them an unhealthy church. I'm showing an example of a church that built in a location that shortly after they built there, the area absolutely exploded. And they saw that coming and planned ahead accordingly.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And the fourth one we're going to hit you with today is just the transfer growth. So, and this can happen. A lot of times you might see this coupled with, again, some newness happening. Church builds a new building and they start filling it really quickly. And a lot of that growth could be the sheep shuffling, as people say. People are just moving over because they've got, all of a sudden there's a great playground for the kids there and everything is new and they've got cool screens and lights and sound system and all the bells and whistles. And
that doesn't mean a church is unhealthy, by the way. I mean, just to be fair, transfer growth happens in healthy and unhealthy churches.
True. Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah.
Because you can also have transfer growth for things like the church, the dying church down the street closed.
Mm-hmm.
And so those people are now without a church and they need to go to church somewhere. And so XYZ church starts growing. You know, they add 10 new families. XYZ church might be a healthy church or they might be an unhealthy church.
Right.
But they benefited from transfer growth.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I mean, the proof comes later. I mean, they could experience a lot of growth for whatever reason, just because it's new, and then are they sustainable? Then is it a healthy environment? Is it not a healthy environment? And because of the previous things that we've already discussed, maybe it continues to grow, and even though there's not any healthy markers in it, but that could be a catalyst, I suppose, for growth, is putting a new building in. Definitely, most churches would see a bump from that.
Yeah. We've seen this with lots of churches that went through the disaffiliation process with the United Methodist Church. That would be a signal to me that they might be a healthy church because they're standing on the authority of God's word and those kinds of things. But not necessarily. I mean, there could be some people who just, from a purely political level, outsiders look at that and go, oh, okay, well, I feel like I can trust this church. So they start going. And then the proof, like you said, comes later. What about the rest of these things? And we've been contacted by a number of these churches and worked with a few that recognized this and said, we want to be a healthy church. So we're seeing this growth as a result of this choice we made, and we'd want to be wise with it. And that's smart, and not just coasting. So if you're experiencing transfer growth for a reason that's outside of maybe just happenstance, let that be a signal to you and go, okay, hey, let's be good stewards of this, and let's be sure that we're a healthy church.
That's a good call. Yeah. Yep. Really good. Okay. Well, there you go. We don't need to reiterate all of the stipulations that we put on this. There's unhealthy churches out there. There's healthy churches out there. Don't judge a book by its cover. And if you don't need to judge them at all, don't do it. Mind your own business. Make your church healthy.
Make your church healthy. What business is that of yours? Just I promise your church has its own problems.
Yeah. How about you become the envy of other churches that aren't minding their own business? You be a healthy church. You grow. We'd love to help you do that. And you can reach out to us at malforsgroup.com. Link will be in the show notes of your podcast app or over on YouTube in the video description below. We'd love to have a conversation with you.
Last thing as we hit end, what would really help if a church wanted to be healthy? If they had a toolkit that was designed for healthy churches. And if you called it maybe, I don't know, what's a really creative name for that? Maybe
for a toolkit for a church to be healthy?
Yeah, like maybe a healthy churches
toolkit.com.
Yeah.
You can throw the .com on there if you want. There's a link also in the show notes for that, because we have such a thing. The Healthy Churches Toolkit is designed to train and equip your team for healthy leadership, for healthy discipleship and mission in your church. Tons of resources on there to help answer some of the daily questions that might come up. And then, Scott, we got a couple of new features in there too that are pretty sweet.
Oh, man. So good. When is this episode going out?
I don't know.
Sometime in
2025.
Well, all I can say is, I won't go into all the details, but there are some neat new things in there. I know for sure we've already talked about this. The Build Groups course is in there. You can grow your groups ministry by 30 to 50% in 6 to 12 months by going through the steps that Adam and his team lay out in that course. It's so practical, so good. The stuff in there, so good. Try it out for free for 7 days.
There you go. Give it a click, and then you can click back in next week when we have a new episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast. Thanks for being with us. See you then.